What's going on, guys? How's everyone doing? How was everyone's weekend? All right, so that was a fun week, wasn't it? That was a bit of a interesting week. If you guys remember, last Sunday we had talked about basically that exact move. I think if you at least if you paid more attention than I did to my own prep, you probably did pretty well last week, because we got almost the exact move that I was kind of articulating was very possible if you got that kind of bullishness out of the gate, and we pretty much did. I unfortunately struggled a little bit last week. If you guys were watching Fast Markets on Monday to kick off the session with Dakota and I missed my early long in NQ, and for some reason I just struggled to, kind of get in the swing of things to continue my week after that. It was tough. It was difficult. I just could not, I think Grips uses the term, you just don't feel like you're in the pocket all the time. You really just are. For me, I feel like I was playing catch up after that initial missed opportunity. I started by trying to, fade some scalps to the downside, and the downside really never came the entire week. We definitely just continued to kind of build up. And, even as before we kind of really dive in here to get us going, if you look at this distribution chart from last week's volume profile here, you kind of see what I would call, if you guys have been paying attention to things I've said on TopsetTV before, you have a triple distribution here. You have, a volume build, a little balance area here. You have another one up here between like 54.80 and 54.40. And then a final one that we kind of were playing around with on Friday above 5,500. And it kind of, like I said, for me, it just threw me off a little bit. I was expecting this move, but realistically, we didn't kind of, have any sort of retracement since we made that new low back in the, the Bank of Japan fiasco. That was now 2 weeks ago, 2 Sundays ago. And I guess I was still kind of looking like, hey, maybe we're going to, rebid off 5,300, 5,385, something to kind of, continue this move to the upside. It just never really came. So for me, it was tough and just a struggle for the week, more or less. But going into this week with that in mind, if you guys have, been living under a rock or whatever else may be, we have either one of the most important or probably one of the biggest non-event weeks of the year, being the Jackson Hole Symposium this week. So definitely some things that can and possibly will move the market, but it's not necessarily what I'm really looking for to kind of, kick things out of the gate, or, if you're really looking at, ES this week, I would expect us to kind of continue to balance in this area, to be honest, between, 55, 85 is a good target of, if we were kind of looking at, hey, if we break above that, when you want to talk and make jokes about air horns, we need to get above that level. If we, kind of zoom out a little bit and you continue to kind of look, backwards in time, if we can clear basically 580, 55, 85 into 5,600, you're going to start to potentially see, probably some FOMO starting to flow into this market. People that are, looking to get back in, if they missed, let's say this kind of, excess low that we had back off 5,100 after the Bank of Japan thing. You may start to see people kind of FOMO in, especially if these are, desks that have been, somewhat on the sidelines this summer or have not really been making any, really aggressive positions in the last few months. Now that traders potentially, if we continue to see, bullishness and things like that, as it, I would say larger players, institutional players come back to the trading desks here. If you guys, are watching the calendar, I know a lot of kids have gone back to school, but we probably have about 2 weeks left of maybe some lighter volume before some more normalcy will return back into this market. pretty much after Labor Day if you're in the United States. And I would imagine even our European friends are kind of in their last hurrah of holiday here, where, you know, once everyone kind of comes back into September, we should see some more normalcy. We should see some better volume, some better trading conditions, and, you know, leading us back into what tends to be a more volatile, aggressive time of the year, being September and October, just on a seasonality type of basis. So definitely something to continue to kind of pay attention to, watch, and be prepared for. But, you know, with what happened last week and, you know, even what happened 2 weeks ago, this is a pretty bullish looking market. It's hard to look at the 4-hour chart, you know, over last week when you kind of saw, if you guys remember, my volume profile chart from last week, which was basically going to act as my pivot heading into last week, was I think around 53.65, 53.85, whatever it was. But it basically was the point of control from that previous week. So even with all of the uncertainty, even with all of the kind of downside activity and volatility we saw 2 weeks ago, 2 Mondays ago, you saw the week finish with the point of control at the high of the week. So it very much was a bullish sign, which is why I was using that basically as my pivot last week. And naturally we pretty much bid right off of it going into, you know, Monday RTH. We had a little bit of a pullback, and then we basically just shot the moon and have continued to build on higher distributions the last few sessions. So, you know, as you guys are kind of trying to understand or learn volume profile and things like that with me, this is something that is pretty bullish if we can clear this. And I'm, like I said, I'm looking at, you know, 55.85 as kind of being a level personally that if we get above it, I am not really looking to fade that outside of a scalp. In my opinion, if we continue to hold above 5,600, you have a new date with all-time highs, unless, you know, there's news, or unless Powell, you know, shuts everyone's dream of any sort of cuts in 2024 down, or just whatever can come out of Jackson Hole. You know, it's possible a lot of things could happen, but unless, you know, something news driven or Fed driven were to, you know, put some weakness back in this market, if we get above 55.85, I have no problem getting ready to just kind of hit the air horn button here and continue that train we were on back in July, where we made, I believe it was 7 days in a row of new all-time highs on the S&P. So, like I said, not something I'd be potentially looking to fade going forward if we definitely do see that continued strength. So we're looking at a pivot this week for me. You know, I'd be looking at basically Friday's low. I'm not really looking to, you know, I think it was, what was that? 55.40s, let's call it, something in that area. It's a low volume node on a longer time frame, and it pretty much is the bottom of this top end distribution on, you know, last week's volume profile. So if we were to lose that, I would say shorts are back on the table. If we were to kind of pierce above 5,600 and fall back into this distribution, I think shorts are safe. But realistically, you know, to start the week, I'd be looking to potentially long off that area if, you know, we start to balance. But if we were to lose it, like I said, I would expect us to go all the way back towards 55.10, 55.85, or sorry, 54.85, and basically clean up this volume. What was it? Was that the CPI print? No, it was the retail sales print. If you guys remember from last week, was the moon kind of candle that we just never returned. I think it was back on Thursday. So I would like to see us kind of potentially clean up some of that volume if we do break 55.40. It seems to be a week with, you know, Jackson Hole and Powell's speech specifically being at 9 a.m. Central, I believe, on Friday. It's definitely a week where, you know, we had options expiration last week. So you're going to start to see a little bit of probably some balance and some uncertainty, some light volatility to kick off the week as institutions make those new kind of monthly options type of, you know, bets and hedges and things like that. So the early part of the Monday or Tuesday after OPEX tends to give you some aspect of a move. But if we don't get that move to the upside, it would make a lot of sense to continue to balance in one of these three distributions until we get PAL or something to potentially kick us out of this area. And like I said, it definitely could be a range week with that in mind. And before, let's see, we got 5 minutes till, Globex open here. But another reason I would kind of lean that way is even looking at, if you're looking at the data releases, earnings, everything, there's nothing that's really going to, wildly move the markets, in my opinion. There's some important people reporting, earnings. There's a few big tech names that could definitely provide some strength or even some weakness into the NASDAQ. So if you're an NQ trader, it's important to be paying attention to Snowflake, to Workday, some of these SaaS names that could definitely, or even Palo Alto to kick off the week, are not going to move the market the way NVIDIA does, but definitely could drive, a lot of favoritism back into some of those names. A lot of positive outlook with Palo Alto if they were to kick off the week very strong, and that were to continue into Wednesday's close with Snowflake. You might see the NASDAQ just continue to bid. That type of, I would say, wider range of positive earnings from some of the, I would say, not the big tech names, but the larger tech names definitely could continue to kind of push us out of this area of balance that I think we're going to possibly be stuck in to start the week. Outside of them, I would say Lowe's, Toll Brothers, and Target are the only ones I'm going to at least be looking at and just not necessarily listening to the earnings calls, but just paying attention to. Toll Brothers could definitely, shift the housing narrative in a couple of different ways, especially with us kind of being in a cutting cycle. Like, what are they looking at now compared to, what is next quarter going to potentially look at if we see, one of the builders start to look positive or negative. So, as far as earnings, like I said, nothing's too crazy. In fact, I don't think any single stock name is going to move the market, most likely until NVIDIA comes back and reports, I believe in a few weeks here. But, other than that, it's a super light week, even on, on the data releases. You have the typical ones. You've got jobless claims, you've got PMI, new home sales, just nothing that's going to, move it. We think we had a lot of those with PPI and CPI last week. So realistically, I would imagine the market is just going to wait for Powell. It seems to be that with it kind of just being a lighter news week, but at the same time, we could continue to kind of zombie drift higher like we did last week, where, there was no seller to be found. Outside of, I think, Monday, the initial weakness we kind of had to kick off the week. But you just see large distributions, and then you see, buyers continue to just show up and push us higher. So very much could be on the table. And if we even look at NQ, what do I got? 2 minutes here before we kick off the Globex Open. And I apologize if my voice is a little raspy. I was in San Diego all this weekend. We were at a wedding that I just got back. So you're actually seeing a little more of a raw market prep for me. I didn't trade Friday outside of a little bit pre-market. So you're seeing me kind of come into this too and give it just an honest, first look. And then we'll talk a little bit more about this probably on Fast Markets tomorrow as I've had more time to digest last week, as well as the Globex Open and see the pre-market tomorrow. So my plan may adjust slightly, but when you see a triple distribution like this, it's not something you see, every single week. A week profile like that it's a little interesting. It definitely shows a more bullish mindset in where we're trading. It's hard to look at that and be like, outside of looking at a range play where you're at, old resistance here at almost 1,700 or 19,700 on NQ. It's the same play. You'd be looking to potentially fail, maybe peak above this and fail, come back in, and then balance in this area. Clean up some of these low volume nodes. There's 2 of them, and those happen to coincide, at least the most near one happens to coincide with a very large point of control volume node here on NQ around 19,200. So if you get weakness, that's probably your most logical path. But we are coming into the market open for Globex. So we're going to kind of pause here, see what happens, see where we open up. And we are open. I just realized I'm on a 1 hour, so that's why this looks like you can't see anything. There we go. All right, so we are open. If any of you guys do trade this open, you are wild. I still will never want to trade the Sunday open. It's just definitely a time where it's just algos and maybe one or two other people. All right, so basically just opening right around where we closed on Friday afternoon. Like I said, on ES. Why is this not loading? Yeah, so on ES, an area to definitely watch to kick off this week is going to be basically Friday's high, but it is a longer term resistance at 55.85, which is basically where we're trading at to start the session here. Something definitely I am, like I said, if we can clearly get above it, with some volume, with buyers present, I am not planning on really looking for any shorts yet on a swing time frame basis, because I would expect us to continue to build and go retest the all-time high, or maybe go make a new all-time high. And it's at that point, maybe after that, as we head into early part of September, that's maybe where I'd be looking again to start talking about looking for a swing short, potentially some further weakness into October, things like that. But like I said, above this area is not something outside of, you guys know me, you watch me trade, outside of some scalp short, off the opens, off exhaustion prints, things like that, stop runs. I'm really not looking to short this outside of scalps and rotations. This is definitely a market, at least after the last 2 weeks, a market where buyers are present and there's not a seller to be found. There's nobody on the offer. There's no one looking to reoffer low or reoffer a little bit higher and send us back into range. I just haven't seen it yet. And even right now, I mean, I know it's 5 minutes in, but we are clearly, pushing above Friday's range already, which is just interesting. Let's take a peek at, what was I going to do? Let's see GC, just to add a different perspective, because gold made a new all-time high last week too. Let's look at last week's distribution. So where is that? I'm still getting used to actively trading inside of TopstepX, so I don't have all of my everything saved. Oh, there it is, fixed range. All right, so we'll grab basically last week's range on gold. Oh, did I screw this up? Yes, because I'm on a 5 minute chart, that's why. There you go. Went to the 30 and it would already spit it out. So that was my fault. I forgot what time frame I was on. So on gold, you guys know me. I'm not a big gold trader, but you can definitely use some of my principles with volume profile along with the Topstep levels inside of TopstepX to really be able to trade any asset, because you're just basing your opinion, your bias, your intraday mindset of which direction to take a trade off nothing but market generated information. So whether it be something like gold, where if you look at even the volume profile here, you see a relatively balanced distribution. And basically, if I was looking to trade this, if we don't continue to kind of build above 25.40, 25.38, you might be able to ride a short back towards 25.20, maybe even back to go retest 2,500. Basically, the value from last week is between 24.80 and 25.10. So if you were getting some weakness off these new all-time highs in gold, you may see that rotation back towards value. All of this older volume here or even the top of majority of last week's range, pretty much around that 25.10 area, you may see us go back, retest that again. And then if we kind of continue to rebid off of that, that's where you could be looking for longs, and you could continue to ride that to make a new all-time high. So the same principle, and you can use in equities, or how I use it in equities to trade, even though I don't trade gold, definitely could be done here. And all I did was grab the fixed range volume profile indicator in Topsetp, dragged basically last week's range, and boom, you get a very nice volume profile to use to kind of guide levels. And if you notice the Topsetp levels here, a lot of them do coincide with various things inside of volume profile, as well as I believe, Hugs kickoff levels. So it's definitely something that you could continue to use as we are talking about market prep, as we are evolving market prep with me, as you guys are learning how I do it with things like MGI and volume profile. It's just a super easy way to kind of supplement, other levels maybe that you're visually identifying or, looking to trade off of. It's just another tool in the toolbox. Never get to a point, in my opinion, when it becomes noise or you have too much noise on your chart. But when you're looking at how to attack the week, I mean, these are simple plays that you can at least have in the back of your mind, so that when we all get excited, market opens Monday morning, everyone's super fired up, super ready to go, and you kind of just forget, your plan more or less, or even me last week with not longing, whatever it was, 18 something in NQ, or maybe it was like 19 something, whatever it was. You guys know, it was basically like the low of last week, and that was my plan. So when you just get super excited, and because I missed my entry by like 1.5 points, I was then 50 points higher trying to fade it for some reason, when realistically that went against my entire week plan if we did get above that level. So the logic is, use these, have them in the back of your mind, and let it guide your decision making going forward for the various instruments you trade. The same thing, I didn't really look much at CL last week, but you see two distributions, maybe even you could call it a third distribution, between the last week's profile, but basically where we're trading now, back near the lows of last week. The same thing, you could use this high volume node down here potentially as a pivot, where if we get above, let's call it 75.70, 75.80, that's your long towards an area of value, or back towards this point of control, or even to close the gap here potentially in CL would make a lot of sense if we can kind of continue to balance in this range. If you get more weakness, you're definitely going back lower, probably towards 73.50, 73.60, or potentially looking for a quick rebid off like 74 in CL. So volume profile works for every instrument, at least anything that obviously is an actual thing that trades. But on Topsetp, pretty much everything you can trade is going to populate the volume. The big four that I know we all talk about, ES and Q, CL, and GC, are definitely going to be valuable ways that you could incorporate it into your trading and your execution, or at least just to guide how I think about levels. Like I said, guys, most of mine comes on not necessarily fading. I don't like to use the word fading moves, but when I talk about volume profile, you would look at, looking at rejection in areas of low volume for a return back into higher areas of, or more volume. Basically what that's showing you is, there wasn't a lot of interest in trading in a low volume node. And so potentially you can either price is going to very quickly move through LVNs or low volume nodes, or we may kind of peek into one and then burst out and return to an area of value, an area where there was a lot of activity in the auction, which is going to basically be back towards this point of control for last week on CL, back towards 78.40. So that's how I describe it, is you're not necessarily fading moves with volume profile. You are looking for areas to enter a trade for return back into a higher area of value. I don't know if I've ever described it that way, but that's how I kind of like to think about it for any instrument I'm trading with volume profile. But in my personal opinion, ES is always like the cleanest thing to just look. And when you start understanding and looking at things like options and stuff like that, it just makes a very quick way to understand and have an idea of where to potentially enter going forward. So let's see, we're still trading slightly above kind of not necessarily my pivot. My pivot's going to be a little bit lower, perhaps even 55.40, 55.65. I don't know. I still have to kind of decide exactly where my pivot's going to be, more or less. But like I said, it would make a lot of sense for us to potentially start to fill in some of this volume between 55.20 and 5500. So light week for me. Like I said, guys, this is me coming back from a light vacation and coming into a very simplistic week where there's not a ton on the docket with news and data, and with that, like I said, last week's distribution of volume, and with Jackson Hole on deck, it may be a very quiet week, at least a quiet start to the week, where there's no need to potentially get super excited, super crazy. There's probably going to be better trades as things settle in. But to kick things off, I mean, we talked about news. It's pretty standard. You've got a few bond auctions. You're going to have a gaggle of Fed speak, I would imagine, leading into the Jackson Hole symposium. You're probably going to have a lot of talking heads and nonsense that can move the markets just kind of randomly. So this is not necessarily a week that I'd say, hey, yeah, you should be sitting on your hands, but there's not necessarily a lot of things that could really, I would say, in my opinion, pushes out of range is probably the right word to use. It just may be quiet is kind of the wording I would use. So nothing too crazy, nothing that's really grabbing my attention. Everything is going to be driven around price action. So we can go to some questions here. Like I said, this is going to be a lighter week in general for my market prep and just the way that I am kind of looking at attacking it. Everything's going to pretty much be an adjustment on the fly for me. Like I said, we have 3 distributions. I expect potentially a rebid off this middle one, this higher volume node here. I would love to see these single prints in the pre-market from last week cleaned up back towards 5,500. Oh, that's the other thing too. I wanted to actually look at, no, we'll do it tomorrow on fast markets. The options activity is not necessarily going to make a lot of sense as we were looking at, Coach Jay beat me to it. He was already asking. I can show you guys, let me pull it up. But when you have options expiration week and then you transition to this week and I don't have the 0 DTEs, I kind of just have how the end of the August chain kind of looked at the end of Friday. And like I said, that's going to probably look very different than it may look on Monday morning when we open, as new positions get established on the longer time frame, and as the August expirations are removed. It just kind of changes things. So we'll take a look. Let me get that pulled up. Give me 2 seconds here. Look at get this one as I'm pulling it up. Just bear with me, guys. So if you have questions as I'm pulling up some of the options data, feel free to throw them in the chat. We can talk more about those. I know Dan was asking about my settings on volume profile, because it probably looks different even if you're using the default ones on TradingView. Mine are going to be slightly different because I don't look at the delta there. I look at everything holistic. Anyway, I'll just show you guys exactly what I'm seeing. But let me. All right, so we'll look at our TraderAid model here. Like as I said, TraderAid these option models are done by a mentor of mine. I have his permission to now show this data live to you guys. This is obviously not being live, but if you are curious and I've described the gamma exposure charts that I had looked at, and I described a very easy, simplistic way to kind of visualize the chain with a lot of different things without having to make yourself crazy trying to, really understand what is going on, what's volume versus open interest on some of these things. Like, just throw it all out. You just get a very easy to use histogram. And like I said, when we were looking at Friday's close and the lack of downside initiation by any sort of seller in this market, in this current state, with what we saw or what it looks like at the close of Friday, you are seeing options activity all the way up to, let's go make a new all-time highs, let's get the air horns and go have more fun. You are definitely seeing some of that more early July euphoric call buying where it's just close your eyes and buy. I'm not saying let's do that with equities quite yet. Like I said, I want to see us clear 5,600 with some enthusiasm, with buyers really showing me on the 0 DTE chain as well that this is what we want to do. Because otherwise, we definitely could go all the way back to 5,500, which is arguably, if we scroll down here, on the put side, not put side necessarily, on the negative gamma side, is actually larger than where we're trading right now. On the net, 5,600 is still going to be a lot higher up here, as well as we're seeing, like I said, a ton up to 5,700, 5,700s, 5,750 as well on SPX. Keep in mind, all of these numbers I'm talking about right now are SPX levels. So the spread, I believe towards the end of last week, was like 20 points. I don't exactly know off the top of my head what it's going to be heading into tomorrow. So we'll get that rough number from me on fast markets. But you're seeing, like I said, a lot of upside, enthusiasm from whether these are market makers continuing to kind of hedge, or these are, open interest type buyers, people that are actively looking to purchase the 5,700 SPX calls. Like I said, with no time horizon, this encompasses the entire chain. So you could even see just people being enthusiastic about bets for next year or whatever, as we are moving out of this cutting cycle. Like I said, looking at this, the Friday of a monthly options expiration and not having context into what this chain is going to look like tomorrow. So someone in the chat tomorrow on Fast Markets for our bell-to-bellers, everyone who tunes in regularly, please remind me to show you or to grab this again tomorrow morning and have the perspective of what we're looking at now with the higher distributions at 5,700, as well as a relatively in the near term, at least around 5,600 to 5,500, like a pretty balanced distribution, as far as a total gamma, not necessarily a net, but you're seeing a more balanced distribution here. But when we look at, look at it on a kind of a total perspective, you're seeing that significantly skewed to the positive gamma side, which would which you would want to think about as there is interest in higher prices in options activity. So, like I said, just keep that in mind. We'll look at this again tomorrow morning, but just take that visual, screenshot of this in your mind of there's interest higher, and then we'll look at it again tomorrow morning. And then as not options week, but as the new month of options kicks in, we'll also take a look at it again Wednesday and see, okay, institutions are probably settled in establishing some of their positions. What is it looking like Wednesday morning as opposed to what did it look like at the end of the day on Friday? So, Jay, thank you for reminding me to at least show this, because it does add some context, at least towards the close, and then we can add more context on how it looks at the open tomorrow, as well as the 0 DTEs that we will also look at tomorrow morning. So let me pull back up Topstep X, so then it'll actually make more sense how I have these set up. So as far as the two I use, one is the fixed range. So one I just dragged all the way from basically the highs and lows of last week. It might be off a little bit because I kind of just eyeballed it real quick. But if we're looking at my settings, I look at it this way. I look at ticks, and I do basically one tick. If you're looking at NQ, you could probably put it to 4, maybe even 8, just depending on how you like to do it. I almost like to look at it as like just a complete kind of, bucket of one color. I don't really like to see, lines in between it, but the purpose is the same. And value areas, you guys can define this a little bit yourself, but typically if you're a volume profile trader, you would use a 70% rule as your value area, and then 30% would basically encompass the low volume nodes, which would be, you only really get one of them here, the 30%, because we didn't quite have a more balanced distribution to the upside with these 2 or high volume nodes for this. But if you guys have seen, or you can see it on my visual range one here. So you have, basically, 2 low volume nodes that are coded in blue, and then the highest volume node is going to be the white in theory. So it really will depend on your software or which platform you're using, but 70-30 is the typical rule. It doesn't always look that way. If you get a D-shaped profile, that's when you really see kind of that 30% versus 70% rule with the 2 low volume nodes and the larger D-shaped profile in the middle, where you'd find your point of control. So those are my basic settings. I mean, you guys can play around and see what works for you too. This is just a very easy way that, I have it set up. Now I'm still playing around more with, doing charting and, rebuilding some of my trading view charts that I've already established and some of my motive wave charts. I'm trying to also build them in TopstepX because I'm planning to use TopstepX more, going forward for my, XFAs and hopefully my live account in the future. So I'm just trying to get more comfortable with it, not only as an execution platform, which is kind of what it is for me right now, but I'm trying to get more comfortable utilizing it truly as, the native charting that I do inside of TradingView as well. So if you're also curious, my visible range is one I probably have on just about every single chart, whether I'm using TradingView or TopstepX. It's just an easy way where it just allows the volume profile to be adjusted regardless of time frame you're looking at. So if I'm on a 5-minute, it could probably very quickly go to almost the RTH volume profile. If I jump to a 4-hour, it's probably going to give me about 2 months worth of volume profile. And like I said, to quickly establish last week's range, you can just drag from the high to low from Sunday to basically Sunday and give you this type of spit out. So those are the 2 I would imagine. As more indicators are added to TopstepX, you'll be able to kind of, add more of the fixed range ones. So if I want to look at a rolling 3 weeks, if I want to look at, month over or the last month, if I want to look at 3 days of this week compared to the last month, whatever it is, you'll be able to do that. I would imagine, here in the short term, as more and more indicators are added, because there are a few more inside of TradingView as well. For these indicators that you can get a different perspective, or if you guys remember my 1-hour chart from last week, I think I have a monthly volume profile as well as the individual weeks. If you guys remember, that was my one where I had all my moving averages on as well. So really up to you guys, but that's how I typically use volume profile. I'm not even crazy with my color schemes. Usually I keep, if you guys remember my motive wave charts, I use majority of it just white and gray because it just kind of eliminates more noise of, worrying about certain things. But it's truly up to you. You guys can still get crazy and customize it. I have my classic blue and red candles here instead of everyone's green and red candles because I need to be different, I guess. All right, so let me look at a few questions here. So when it comes to drawing volume profile, when I look at the week, I will always include Globex or the overnight session as well as RTH, but it's really personal preference. I don't like to look at trading futures personally with a gap in futures because I didn't include the overnight. There's a lot of interesting data that you can look at if you look at where the Asia session traded compared to where the London session traded, especially if you're, one of our, Asian Pacific traders, or you're watching, Dee do the London Open and you're trading with her. It's important, in my opinion, to also include the overnight sessions. I think SPX gaps are more relevant personally than, not including, let's say, the overnight session. Now, if the overnight session does include a gap, we tend to fill those relatively quickly within a few, either a session, maybe 2 sessions. They usually always get filled. So in my opinion, if you take out the overnight and only look at RTH for the New York session, I mean, you're missing a lot of valuable information personally, especially when you look at, granted, we're in a weird market cycle with what the Fed's doing, but historically, the London Open is very bullish. And if you're a US citizen and you have a 401k and things like that, our London friends tend to be a lot of the reason the overnight is very bullish. So it is important to always incorporate that. I do, but it's really personal preference. I just don't like to see gaps in my volume profile as well as, in my charts. It just gives me, it eliminates some aspect of the data that I actually think is relevant and useful. All right. So you guys can keep peppering in questions. Like I said, this is a super light market prep type session for me. Part of the reason is I'm just getting back from a light vacation. And I hope everyone else had a great weekend too. But for me, I'm still kind of, looking and getting my perspective on what we may do this week. I think you guys have a good idea of what a game plan can be for this week, but as Hogue likes to say, anything can happen in this market. And on a week where I would imagine everyone is going to be looking for the type of job owning the Fed is going to do, is it 25 basis points? Is it 50 basis points? Is it no basis points in September? I don't think that's going to be the case, but I would imagine it's a lot of back and forth on, what is the Fed funds future saying beyond this week and how the market is reacting to, the size of the cuts and things like that. So it's a good week to just kind of have a plan, but be ready to, really adjust on the fly. I think we definitely are going to balance this week, but that's just my perspective. Do you ever trade gold? How would you look at it if you do? We definitely already kind of talked about this very briefly, but I'll jump back to GC. I do not trade gold. I have had one great gold trade in the entire time I've traded futures, and it was a few months ago. It basically was a long that I just happened to catch in the overnight, and kept just kind of trailing my stop throughout the overnight, and it made me a good amount of money. But I am not a gold trader. I'll leave that to Mr. Slow Markets, Coach DBA himself. I don't see it that well. And it shouldn't be the case because like we've talked about earlier, if you're a volume profile trader like I am, you don't have to overthink a lot of these. You don't have to overthink what you're trading. You just have to understand that, we tend to not sit in low volume nodes and we tend to return to higher areas of value and higher areas of volume in the auction. So in theory, that would be if we don't continue to kind of build above 2540 on GC, I would expect some aspect of a rotation and a retest back to 2500. I do not trade gold, guys. That is not a plan for how I would attack this week. But if I was trading gold and I'm looking at this, I'm not interested in longing it at the all-time high. I'm looking at this of, hey, if we hold and build here, yeah, maybe you're looking to long off, 2530, 2540. But if we fail here with any sort of a meaningful sell, we probably will go retest 2500 again, which was kind of that psychological breakout level of, oh, gold's, now trading at $2,500 an ounce and all those type of things. So we kind of have broken through that. So I would imagine, just knowing the way things trade and knowing the way volume profile works, we will probably come back to this low volume node here at 2520, maybe even to 2510, 2500, and potentially make a decision there. Is everyone now comfortable with gold trading at, above 2500 going forward? Have we accepted these higher prices? And if that's the answer, then yeah, I'd be looking for a long off those areas, 2510, 2500. And potentially looking to, ride that, continue to make a new all-time high. That may be the trade this week. We'll see. But when you look at gold overall, outside of the breakout from, Thursday and Friday, we had a pretty balanced D-shaped profile for the week, with the largest distributions basically being back around 2,500 to 2,480. So not a gold trader, but that would be my read on gold. And I know we didn't spend a ton of time talking about NQ, which, as you guys know, I was looking at ES and talking my plan on ES. Excuse me. I need some water here. But if you guys remember from last week, I described I don't really build a week plan or market prep on NQ outside of just having my areas of interest that I'm looking to engage with kind of marked. Just because NQ just doesn't obey levels and to a T the way ES does, where if I say 55.85, I know kind of above 87 with any sort of, enthusiasm, maybe even 90, you're probably wrong. And we're probably going to 5,600 on NQ. That range at times can be 30 points. And, I don't necessarily always think about my entries on NQ as hey, it's 50. It's 540. No, it may end up being between 520 and 560. And if you're an idiot like me last Monday, you just throw that idea that NQ trades, wicks in ranges like that, and you just refuse to jump in long because we were trading, 2 points higher than the entry I was looking for. So with that in mind, if you look at NQ's volume profile from last week, you see almost the identical pattern that we were talking about, that triple distribution of high volume nodes across NQ the same way you did on ES. So the same play here. I would look for some aspect of maybe a peak above, 19,700. And if we can continue to build up that, by all means, this is going to be a very bullish, run back towards probably 20,000 and then make a decision there. Just like ES probably trades back into 5,600 and we kind of look to see what happens next. But if we were to peak above and come back into value and potentially lose 600, it's just like the same play on ES. That's where I'd be looking for potentially a rotation all the way down. If you get any sort of weakness this week, whether it be from, like I said, one of the big names, maybe it's even Toll Brothers on Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever day that was, that just puts a little fear in the housing market. Like I don't exactly know what may cause it. It could just be a natural rotation and balance from this range, just like we were talking about on ES, where NQ, maybe it falls back towards 19,200, an area of higher volume. Like we said, you have all of this volume from like basically the last couple weeks here, right here around 19,000. And that happens to be last week's point of control. So if you're making the range play, and if you were potentially got short, let's say inside of 19,600, that's a place where you could meaningfully be looking for not necessarily a larger move, but a full rotational move off of this high volume node here would honestly be back towards, 19,200. You see this, this low volume edge right here around 19,200. And then you see kind of that full point of control, like I said, back to around 19K. So I would expect some aspect this week. If, I will draw some cran lines because who doesn't love a good cran line? Maybe, like I said, we pierce above here, you fall back in, you rebid, you fail again, but some aspect of balance basically in this distribution here. is kind of what I would look at if we got any sort of weakness, or we just couldn't make that run towards 20,000, or maybe we did and now we're in the middle of the week and we fell back into this range. I'd be looking for us to fill in some of that area. Nothing too crazy. I'm really leaning towards this may be a week of balance, possibly. Like I said, if we get that good bullish initiation to kick off the week, then by all means, let's make a run to all-time highs. Let's get the air horns going and make everyone happy. But, you know, for me, it's a good reminder that I need to be more patient and I need to trust my prep a little more. If I put in the time, if I put in the energy, I need to, you know, not be afraid because I missed my entry in theory by a few points to still, you know, get long or get short around my initial read, because that tends to work out, rather than, oh yeah, that was my read the whole weekend and I missed my entry, so I'm going to short at 50 points higher and hope for something, instead of my plan there, which was, hey, if we get bullish out of that point, if we get long there, I mean, there's a run, and you guys know the run we went on last week. We basically moved 1,000 points last week in the NASDAQ. Not saying I was going to ride it for any more than 20, 30 points, but yeah, it's just one of those where sometimes you miss your first trade of the week and it can just kind of set you off, whether it be just a little bit tilted or just a little bit of, you know, you're questioning your plan at that point, and then you're looking for points, and then you're looking for a trade, and then you're chasing downside, or you're chasing, you know, trying to get out of the hole that you dug yourself in to start the week. So in a weird way, I need to back test my own data, but I happen to know if my first trade of the day is red, I tend to struggle, possibly hit a daily loss limit. If my first trade is green, I tend to finish the week and that session, you know, very much in a positive. As soon as even if it's a small stop out or a small scratch for a few $100s red, digging yourself out of that after that first trade because you got a little excited sometimes and you took a poor entry, it's just, you can just set your week up for failure real quick. So just remember that, guys. Be patient. Be ready to, you know, stick with your gut a little bit, like I should have done last week, rather than kind of throw my bias out the window. If I had, you know, stayed on my plan, we would have, I mean, I was right on. We went to that first box, and then we went to an old box that I had drawn a little bit higher, basically back towards, 50, basically that 54.40 area to 54.90 was an old box I had drawn, and we basically ran to the first box. If you guys remember where I drew kind of where I was expecting us to potentially make a decision, we basically just blew through that decision box that I had drew and you know, went to where we're trading now. So trust your gut, trust your plan, trust your bias that you have necessarily not bias is the wrong word. That is the wrong word. Trust the, you know, perspective you have on the market with the research you did, the planning and preparation you put into going into each trading session or going into your week, and don't just be ready to, you know, change it because you missed your first entry like I did last week. So, any Bitcoin trading? No, I don't trade crypto. That's a whole long story for me, but you know, I've never actively traded it. I've never really bought and held it either. There's just a funny story with me, you know, owning some back in like 2010 and getting like no money out of it. So, but yeah, I don't actively trade it. It would be interesting though, if how many people are actively trading, I believe the Bitcoin futures index that is in Topstep X. I've actually never really played around with it. That may be fun to do in a combine, to see if anyone would want to see, hey, can you pass a 50K combine or 150K with trading nothing but Bitcoin futures? I'd actually love to see. If someone's done that too, please chime in the chat, because that'd be kind of fun. Let me see here. But yeah, guys, like I said, I was going to keep this brief, and we actually went way longer than I had kind of anticipated for this market prep, just being such a, oops, I'm still drawing things here. With it being such a simplistic type of week and kind of getting into this and figuring things out a little bit more. That's kind of the gist of it, where I'd be looking for, whether it be an NQ or ES, the same type of play. Do we peak above? Do we fail, come back into this distribution from last week and potentially balance? The point of control, like we said, is in kind of the dead center of last week's volume profile. So if we were to return to that, I'm not saying that as a massive bearish sign, saying everyone, duck and cover, but it would make perfect sense if you trade volume profile of where, if we can't make a new high here, where are we going? Well, we're probably going back to this longer time frame, high volume node here, and last week's point of control. So that is kind of the gist of it. Like I said, guys, this is a raw market prep for me, just coming back from a quick vacation. And just taking a first peek at the market. I may adjust this. I want to see how overnight trades, but if you're just looking at the simplistic aspect of what did we do last week and where we go, where we may go, it's probably going to be stuck in this range until Powell decides where we're going. So if there are no other questions from the chat, I want to thank you guys all for tuning in here, supporting us here for the second week of Market Kickoff with me. This is going to continue to evolve and adjust. I'm going to plan on taking a few screenshots of winning trades, losing trades this week, and do a little post-mortem with you guys probably next Sunday, because I'll have more time to kind of prepare it and do it, actually have a talk track and things like that around, a good trade, a bad trade, maybe even a scratch if I can, get one of those and maybe why I folded it. And we, like I said, I'll take some screenshots and hopefully be able to kind of create a narrative around what happened and what day it was, what was going on in that given time, what was I seeing on the DOM or whatever it may be. But I think a post-mortem, good and bad, would be a cool thing to potentially add to this as we're looking at planning. I think it's always important to always learn from and continue to evolve. So for me, a good trade is there's learning there. A bad trade, there's probably even more learning, whether it be a psychological learning or a, just market instinct learning. You guys know some of us, talk on the show. Sometimes you feel things before they happen as you get screen time, as you just understand it. You start to get that feeling in your gut or whatever, that you're right, that you're wrong, or it's time to get out, or it's time to take profit. So I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of those trades. And if I can, like I said, articulate a moment like that too, and have a story to tell and something we can actually dissect a little bit more, since there's going to be weeks like this where the prep doesn't have to be overthought. We have a very easy idea here of where we may go, or what the rough idea of where to enter or where not to enter this week. So I'd also like to kind of do some not deal dissection. That's more my old world. Some trade dissection, some trade post-mortem, and I will be the first person to throw myself into the fire and talk about a terrible trade I made in the trading week if one does occur. So that is kind of my plan for now. But who died? Exactly. Just my P&L on maybe a couple of these bad trades. But yeah, guys, I will hold it here for another minute or two. If there are no more questions, thank you guys for all tuning in. And I will see you bright and early on Fast Markets. So thanks, guys. Have a good night.